was making less than the minimum wage, who became an employer who paid more than the minimum wage. I got to tell you that this is the farthest distance between common sense and the Democrat policies. Here's what I mean. In the middle of a pandemic where nearly 11 million Americans who have already lost their jobs, the last thing you do is increase the cost on businesses, which will, according to the CBO, at least shutter 1.4 million jobs. If you want to make that more personal, walk into any restaurant in America. 110,000 of those restaurants have already closed their doors. Walk into any restaurant, as I have done in D.C., and talk to a bartender like Cassie, who I spoke to just a couple weeks ago. Ask her, what is the negative impact on the increase of the minimum wage? She says there are a couple of them. First, you literally reduce her income because you eliminate tips. She's been doing that for the last 14 years, working in the business. And she says simply that she feeds her family off her tips and her wages. There's no worse response to a pandemic than to eliminate jobs. Or go to Charleston, downtown Charleston, visiting a waiter, Slade, who graduated from the College of Charleston and made a decision that he could make his profession serving tables. His average income is between $40 and $50 an hour. But if you raise the minimum wage, you actually reduce the number of opportunities for folks like Slade and Cassie to be able to go to work and support a family. You actually increase the cost, you lower employment, and you have a negative impact on the long-term viability economically of everyday families like Cassie's and Slade's.
Yeah, folks, this COVID package that is being pushed by the Democrats is very, very detrimental to our working families across Iowa, specifically when it comes to the $15 an hour federal minimum wage issue. This would be so harmful for our Iowa small businesses. And the CBO does have the estimate that has been talked about where we would see the loss of 1.4 million jobs across the United States. And bringing it home to me as a mom, you know, someone who did work for fast food in high school and in college at the minimum wage, but then becoming a mother and relying on child care, the impact to Iowa's child care centers at a $15 an hour federal minimum wage would cause an increase of 21% to Iowa's child care centers. 21% passed on to our families. Many Iowa families would not be able to afford that increase in child care. So what I have heard, and I'm going to read you a couple quotes, but so don't just take it from me. Here's Iowans speaking to the $15 minimum wage. The Iowa Restaurant Association says this is nothing short of tone deaf. John, who is a small business owner in Des Moines, says, it would be detrimental to our ability to grow our business and add employees. Tiffany, a small business owner in Pella, there's absolutely no way I could hire the 5 to 10 people we usually do during their busy season. And Jerry, who is a small business owner in Marshalltown, a mandatory $15 per hour would be very brutal on us. When wages go up, prices go up, and your customer count goes down. So these are everyday Iowans, small business owners and operators that would see a detrimental impact if we had to do a $15 per hour federal minimum wage.
Well, you've heard us already talk about the bill and many of its provisions, which has been pointed out, I think, many times by many of my colleagues, would have a very, I think, detrimental and harmful impact at the time when we're trying to get people back to work and get our economy going again. Spending $1.9 trillion, much of which in certain areas, if you talk about the education funding, doesn't spend until after 2021. It's hard to characterize something as an emergency when the majority of the money is going to be spent in the out years between 2022 and 2028. Or if you look at some of the other provisions, the big state bailouts, $350 billion going to state and local governments. And if you look at 21 states across the country had year-over-year revenue increases this last year. And a lot of the money that's already been put out there hasn't even been spent already. And so if you look at the amount of money that's being spent in the totality of this bill, $1.9 trillion, less than 10% of it actually goes toward public health spending. And in fact, really truly addressing the crisis, which is the virus. A lot of it's going into these other things. And as my colleagues have pointed out, I think the minimum wage is something that is particularly troubling and harmful at a time when you're trying to get people back to work and trying to create jobs again, because it drives up the cost of hiring people. And I can tell you, as somebody like Senator Scott, who was growing up in a small town, I worked for less than the minimum wage. I worked for the minimum wage. I started bussing tables at $1 an hour. I went up to $2.25 when they moved me up in the place, and then I finally made it to cook, which was big time. That was $6 an hour. But everybody in my town, I grew up in a little town on Interstate 90, as people were heading west to Mount Rushmore and Yellowstone and points beyond, was in one way or another involved in the travel industry. So two of my brothers worked at filling stations. My sister waited tables. My other brother worked at our big local attraction, which was the Pioneer Auto Show. And as I said, I cooked at the Star Family Restaurant. All of those businesses work with very narrow margins. And if you take a $15 minimum wage, and I will tell you right now in South Dakota, the minimum wage, and our state sets it, which is frankly where I think it should be done, our state has a $9.45 minimum wage. What you're essentially telling those businesses in South Dakota that I just mentioned, that you're going to increase the amount of money that they have to pay their workers by over 50%. 50% increase in the wages that they would pay. Well, what does that do? Obviously, it puts a lot of them out of business, but it also raises the cost of everything else. That's got to get passed on. So anybody who's buying a hamburger or filling up or getting a motel room there in that community or communities alike all across South Dakota and all across this country are going to see the cost of doing business go up. That's going to make it that much harder for people who are trying to get back into the economy to get back in the economy. And as has already been pointed out, don't believe us, the Congressional Budget Office, which is the scorekeeper, the referee, if you will, when it comes to these issues, has said that it would cost the economy 1.4 million jobs. We shouldn't be costing jobs. We ought to be thinking about adding jobs. And that means putting policies in place that encourage economic growth, encourage investment, and make it easier, not harder, for small businesses across this country to create jobs and to grow their businesses.
I'd tell you that it looks to me like the Biden administration wants Wyoming to fail. First, our oil, gas, and coal jobs have been decimated. Then for people who want to stay in Wyoming to work and open a small business, they want to make the wages so high that the small business is failing before it even gets started. The ability to fund our schools has been challenged because oil, gas, and coal revenues are so extremely down. What we read about what the Biden administration wants to do through leadership at the Department of the Interior will further exacerbate the problems in Wyoming in its energy industry. So to then turn around and say, regardless of whether it's New York or Wyoming, the minimum wage is going to be $15 an hour. Maybe that works in New York, but it doesn't work in Wyoming. I think about my friend who has the coffee and donut shop in Alpine, Wyoming. A single mother in her 30s gets up and makes donuts for commuters up to Jackson who work up there in the morning, and she would not be able to afford anyone to help her in her little shop at $15 an hour in Alpine, Wyoming. And she is just the kind of person who has been hurt by COVID's effects and needs an opportunity to get back on her feet, get back to work, open the economy, and survive. There are thousands of small business owners like her in Wyoming and all over the country. So if New York wants to have a $15 minimum wage, by golly, they should have it. I'm sure it's more expensive to live in New York than it is in Wyoming. But placing that one-size-fits-all standard on every state in this country is ill-advised and irresponsible.
I remember the inauguration speech of President Biden. He wanted to change the culture in Washington. He wanted to bring us together. He picked the one issue that we were actually working together on and blew it up. We have passed, in a bipartisan fashion, well over $4 trillion of COVID relief by over 90 votes. We had a Republican president, a Republican Senate and Democratic-controlled House, and we're able to spend $1.9 trillion in about 24 hours because we all saw the need. There are Republicans who are trying to sit down with the president to have a more tailored package. I'm for checks, but not for people who make $250,000. The minimum wage has got nothing to do with COVID. Zero to do with COVID. It's got everything to do with their liberal wish list. Everybody's got a story. I grew up in the back of the Sanitary Cafe in central South Carolina. We lived in the back of the restaurant. We had a liquor store on one side, a restaurant bar on the other, and downstairs we had a pool room. And when I was old enough, I ran the pool room and I worked for food. So the bottom line is, I know what it's like for businesses to have to absorb increased cost. There's only so much you can pass on to the consumer. So this is the really bad idea. I don't mind looking at increasing the minimum wage in a responsible way. I just met with the Waffle House today. If you don't know who the Waffle House is, you're not in touch with America. So the Waffle House is where the rubber meets the road in terms of affordable good food and people working hard and living off tips. So they got a plan I'm going to talk to Joe Manchin about how to increase the minimum wage, index it to inflation, that will be easier for business and get us to where we want to go. But what these folks are proposing is doubling it at a time when government at the state and local level is pretty much restricting your ability to earn a living. You want a 1-2 punch for small business? This is it. How many small businesses in the hospitality industry are less than full capacity? And at the time you're reducing their ability to serve their customers because of COVID concerns, you're going to double their cost. That makes zero sense. So to the American people, we told you, if they got in charge of everything, watch out. It was worse than I thought. So I'm hoping the parliamentarian will see a doubling of the minimum wage is a major policy decision inconsistent with reconciliation. I do believe there's bipartisanship to move the minimum wage up in a more responsible fashion, and I would urge President Biden, if you can't find common ground here, you're not looking hard enough. Because all of us have voted for very large sums of money to help the country get back on its feet with the COVID relief package. The bill, Mr. President, that you're pushing has got more to do with the liberal wish list than getting us back in business due to the COVID package and helping people with the vaccines. So all I can say is that this $1.9 trillion being jammed in a partisan fashion, doubling the minimum wage and a bunch of other stuff, is the furthest thing from unity I've seen. And what's so sad, this is the one area we're all working well together, and now that has been destroyed. So I would urge President Biden to reconsider, sit down with Republicans, and find a better way forward.
Good afternoon, everybody. 14,000 jobs. That's what raising the minimum wage to $15 an hour, that's how many jobs we would lose in the state of Kansas. 14,000. And like some of my friends, Tim and Joni and John said, my first job was also working for minimum wage at a cell barn, $1.60 an hour in 1976. That's right. I was scooping cow manure for $1.60 an hour. But within a month's time, I'd worked myself up. I got a dime raise. I worked with about 15 other high school classmates through high school and junior college with a great part-time job, and it was a great supplement to my income and helped me not have any debt when I finished college as well. Don't have to tell you all that the cost of a median cost of a house in Kansas may be $80,000. That same house in New York City, San Francisco is probably 3 to 5 times that. What you can buy with the dollar in Kansas is different than what you can buy with the dollar in New York City, just like Cynthia said. So one size doesn't fit all. I think that's very, very obvious. What frustrates me, though, is issues like this take our eye off the real ball. Look, this long, cold, dreary winter is almost over. I can see spring coming. There's so much great news out there. Our economy's recovering. Our unemployment in Kansas is around 4%. Across the nation, it's around 6%. We're predicting a GDP growth this quarter of over 9%. Great healthcare news out there. In the past week, we discovered that our vaccines with one shot give 75 to 80% vaccination rates to protect people from the virus. We could have herd immunity by April or May if our president's team does their job and our local governors do their jobs. That's what we need to get this economy going again and this country going again, is getting shots in people's arms, getting people back to work, and getting our kids back in school. That's where our focus needs to be right now. Thank you so much for coming today. Appreciate you being here.
Earlier this week, a couple of your colleagues, Senators Cotton and Romney, introduced a proposal that would not raise the minimum wage to $15. I think it's $10 and it's incremental. Is that something that you guys would support? Is there room for negotiation on a proposal like that?
I would say that, yes, we can take a look at that. We certainly do support the E-Verify that is listed within that bill. We think that's a good step. But again, measuring what is right for individual states, because I'm like Wyoming and Kansas and South Carolina, they're in Iowa. What may work in New York or California may not work in Iowa. So I still think we can find a way to raise the federal minimum wage. That should be a discussion point. But I push it back to the governors, and we really should allow those states to determine what is best for them. But today, I think what we're here to say is that what's being proposed and put in front of us next week at $15 per hour federal minimum wage should absolutely, one, not be in this bill because it's not COVID related, but two, it absolutely destroys states and our small businesses.
Senator Ernst, I have a question for you specifically based on the example you used about child care in particular and the costs going up. I just wonder how you respond to the sort of other side of that argument that 20% raise for somebody who's taking care of children, which is a super important job over a 5-year period. I guess the counter-argument is, how is it not worth it for something that's that important?
And let me explain, too, from the other side. It is important, and we want those child care workers to make a good wage. The child care center that I visited on my 99-county tour last week, they start their employees at $11 an hour, which in Iowa is a very good wage. That's starting wages. So we're above the federal minimum wage already. But what this proposal that the Democrats are putting out there would do is increase, according to an independent study, increase the cost of child care. If you have 2 children under school age full-time in child care, in Iowa, it would increase by $6,300 a year. I will tell you that most working families in Iowa, even those working above minimum wage, would not be able to afford that. They couldn't afford it, which means you are going to have a parent step out of the workforce and stay home instead of paying the additional child care costs.
Senator, anybody from CBS. Would any of you support the COVID relief bill if the minimum wage wasn't in it?
No, I wouldn't. I'm sorry, but it also includes bailouts for cities and states. And I'm not going to ask my Iowa taxpayer, when our state legislature just passed a status quo budget, our cash reserves are full. I'm not going to ask the good, budget-minded folks of Iowa to send their taxpayer dollars to states and cities that can't manage their budgets. I understand there are certain localities that have been hit hard by COVID, but that's what a COVID package should do, is be very tailored. There's a lot of liberal wish lists in this package. $1.9 trillion is astronomical, and when you're doing it in a partisan fashion rather than deciding you're going to work with the other party, it's absolutely wrong, and I would not support it. We have to come together on this. We've done 5 packages already in a bipartisan manner. That's what we want to do, is work together and be responsible in what we're spending, focused on COVID recovery.
One of the other pieces of legislation that Democrats are wanting to pass is the Equality Act, and many of them that are against it say that it's more than just an attack against women and girls' teams, but it's also possibility of lawsuits in churches, things like that. Can we get any of your reaction on the Equality Act?
I would just say I would have to, one, read the legislation and understand the secondary and tertiary implications. You just mentioned a few of those. So I think that is really important, that we make sure that we can maintain our religious liberties we need to address religious liberties while also maintaining the opportunity for everyone to be successful in our great country.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.